Welcome to the Alpha Software Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products here at Alpha Software. Today we're going to be going over another sort of back to basics thing in Alpha Anywhere. If you were with me a few weeks ago, we were looking at repeating sections. And repeating sections, this was based on a question that someone had written in for. Repeating sections let you place sort of child and parent-child information on a screen. So for example, in your UX, if you had an invoice, which is the most typical sort of example, you could have an invoice header, which has got the date and the customer information up at the top. And then below, in repeating sections, you can have a listing for each thing that was purchased on that particular invoice. So a very standard example. And we did it with repeating sections. At the time, I had mentioned that you can also do this using list controls, and list controls are very powerful controls that let you display things not just as text, but in real free-form formats, in maps, and all kinds of things like that. And it's also has got great built-in search capabilities. Has the ability to handle offline operations, so you can make updates to these to lists and data while you don't have an internet or cell connection, and then synchronize that data on the back, which is one of the big advantages to lists. So today it's actually going to be a very simple demonstration, but I just want to show you how you can use a list, or actually multiple lists, to show parent-child information on your UX. Before I go any further, you should see the word repeating sections here on the screen, and you should hopefully hear my voice. If you do, let me know in the chat window or in the questions box. I just want to make sure everything is coming through. Just a quick AV check. So if you could just say whether or not you can hear me. Okay, all good, wonderful. Hey, thanks so much, appreciate it. All right, so today we're going to be talking about parent lists for parent-child data. And we will be doing this all live today, so bear with me. Okay, so first of all, let's take a look at our repeating sections example that was here. Sure. And in it, we had an example which basically, whenever you selected a different order, so for example, this is order 71938, here are all the items that were associated with that order, and I can move from section to section, order to order, and I can see different items. And this was done using the repeating section. Today we're going to be doing that using lists, so I'm going to go ahead and close that down. And let's take a look at one that I have pre-baked for us, linking lists. And we will take a look here, working preview. And the setup is pretty similar. So as I move from order to order, click here, here, and here, you'll see that each person or each order number, 71780, for example, has these orders associated with it. Fairly big order. I think this is used for wholesale, is this AdventureWorks database example. All right. So with all of those in place, the question is, how do you set up something like that? Well, the way you do it is you do it using two different list controls. The first list control points to the header, the invoice header. So let's just open it up and take a look at it. I'm going to double click an invoice header. And this is a list that I defined as having a data source type of SQL. Once I have selected that, I set up my connections string, and then I built out my SQL statement. So here is my SQL statement. It is just simply the sales order header and the customer. I did this as two tables, not just one, because the sales order header doesn't actually have customer name or customer phone numbers or things like that, things that you'd want to have displayed up in the header. So I've joined these together. So that was fairly simple. And then I made a detail view for that, which you can do in list properties by checking on has detail view. And the detail view is basically, it's just a set of fields that show you, that are displayed, that show you which record you've selected and which fields you'd like to have on it. I set that up here by using the quick setup genie. I'm going to click on this. And what you can do with that is you could say create controls on the UX to display the list detail view. And that's exactly how I set that up. So if I just choose the first selection, it would take all of the possible fields and put them on the list. Or if I go with this second option here, the selected one, I can select what I want. So I could say, oh, I just want ship date and status and whatever, customer ID, and also the customer's name, things like that. That's already set up for me, so I don't have to really do that here. So with that all set, that was our first table. And I could just take a look at that here by clicking on preview, and I should see there's the sales order, and this is just basically all the data that's come back from the header. All right. Now in the detail view, like I said, I had already set up some fields. Let's take a look at them. So I set up sales order ID, order date, title, first name, last name, suffix, probably more than I needed. And they're all right here. Okay. Then I decided I would like to be able to navigate from record to record in this list, like I did in my previous example when I used repeating sections. It's a little bit different when you're doing lists. So with a list, you still come down to define controls, but it's a different set of controls. So if you scroll down here under defined controls, you will find list navigation buttons and list navigation icons. I went with the icons option. And when I clicked on that, it put in my first, previous, next, and last button. All I had to do is just tell it which list control I was interested in. So that's how I got the buttons there. Now, how did I connect up details? I will show you that. Details is another list. I'm going to double click on that details list. And in it, again, we're going to use the connection string for north winds. And my SQL statement this time has got a different set of fields and a different set of tables. I'm connecting the sales order detail now to product. The reason is because the sales order detail doesn't have all the fields in it that I want. For example, the name of the product is something I want to have displayed on the invoice, and that's not actually listed in sales order detail. It only has a product ID. So I've linked these two together by product ID, and it let me pull out other fields such as the product's name. All right, so if I had just set it up like this and left it alone, I would have two different lists independent of each other. One shows all the order headers, one shows all the order details, but they wouldn't be connected to each other. In other words, if I were to select on a particular order, I wouldn't see just the items for that order, I'd see it for all of them. So what I had to do is I had to set up a type of filter in that, which is what I have done. And I did that here with my where statements. So don't choose everything, choose stuff where. Let's go into the filter. I'll show you how that was set up. I'm sorry, I'm using a out-of-date version where I have my icons broken. They're all here, but they're broken. They'll be fixed shortly. So here, when I set up the filter, I selected the field that I wanted to filter. And so from the detail view, I said, only show me sales orders, or only show me details where the sales order matches the one that I've selected. And the one I've selected, I've placed into something here called an argument. Let's see what that looks like. So if I were to say define arguments, there are a couple places you can find them, but an argument is, think of it like a variable that gets set automatically and maintains its state and can be changed while the user is logged in. Afterwards, it disappears. It doesn't get saved into a table anywhere, but it's stored in memory. So we've created an argument that's simply called order ID. And we've told it it's sort of its start value, but go ahead and click that out. What we also did, another place to get to arguments is here in the menu. Select menu, and I'll go down to arguments. And you will see that here's my argument, order ID. I clicked the plus button to insert that. And then I have some choices. How would you like to get that data? In other words, how would you like to set that variable? Well, I'd like to have that set at runtime. It was one of the options here. I could have just pulled it from the value of a logged in user. That's pretty handy. For example, you can grab a user ID and only show records for that particular user ID. Very, very common use. You can have XBasic set that at some point if you'd like, or you can do it from another variable. Here we said set value at runtime. And the value that we wanted was the invoice header. So the invoice header is just one of the options here in this list. And that is what is returned by our invoice list. So in other words, this invoice header list, when you select a particular invoice, it's going to return a value. Thanks to the argument, that value is automatically going to be placed into an argument here. And that argument then can be used in the filter for my details view. And the practical upshot is that when I click on a particular item, or I move to a particular item in my my list, which is that here, I will see the products that are associated with that. Now you might be asking yourself, didn't you put 2 lists on here? How come I'm only seeing 1 list at the bottom and I'm seeing just your detail view? And the answer is because I didn't want to show that list. So the invoice header, because typically, if you think about it, an invoice just has one set of sort of fields at the top and then a list of repeating fields underneath. So we didn't want to see all the invoices, so I did a hide. So we just selected that particular one. So that's how you set that up using linking lists. Not very hard. This isn't going to be a long demo, but I wanted to point it out to you. When I was looking through for documentation, I didn't find a ton. So we're going to be updating documentation on how you link these things together. But that was pretty much all I wanted to show today. I know it's a real short one, but if you've got questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. Can you place the completed controls for download? Yeah, I absolutely can do that. Hang on a second. Save that. And actually what you're going to need is you're also going to need my database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a note to Scott, our guy here who puts up the videos, that when we post this onto YouTube, and we usually give them until Friday, we will have a link then to either to GitHub or to some sort of zip file, which has got this example. Explain the difference between hide and show client side. Yeah, there are a bunch of different hides there. Let me hide this. So let's say you've got a control like the invoice header and you want to hide it. So you can always, if you want it to always be hidden, there's just a checkbox for that, but you can make it conditional. So I'm going to type in the word hide, and you'll see I've got 3 choices here for hiding. The first choice is just always hide it, yes or no. The second one is server side. This is one where you can write some basically XBasic types of functions that will be evaluated to determine whether or not the invoice header will appear. And then the other kind is the client side. And with client side, you're basically doing it in something akin to JavaScript. So you could say, for example, if the, I don't even know what I'd say, if the last name is equal to McCormick, don't show this item or something like that. But the point here is, I forgot they have an animated show and hide, which does magically make things disappear and reappear, which is kind of cool. Catches the attention. But server side lets you use XBasic, client side properties lets you use JavaScript. Server side doesn't work unless you have a connection. Client side will work, including in an offline application. So if you want that flexibility, do your stuff client side. All right, what else we got? Any reason why you linked the 2 lists using a filter rather than the parent list option? Well, as it turns out, I did turn on the parent list option. Let me just show that to you here. And no, there was no real reason why I did it one way or the other. The real key here behind parent list, and this is one you do check. You check this thing and you tell it, here's the parent list ID. What this tells Alpha is that when I change something or when I navigate to a different record, I want you to reevaluate the filter that I'm using and change what I'm seeing on the screen. I happen to put that filter here, but you can actually preload the data right here. And then you can link parent and child right here as well. Perfectly valid way to do it. Might be easier So I didn't really have I didn't have a good reason for doing one over the other, but thank you for pointing out that is an option. Someone said, can I use hide for a control? And can I access that control on the client side? Yes, you absolutely can use. You can use it for any control, the hide option. So I happen to do it on list, but you could do it on the title field, or you could do it based on, if, for example, if you had a certain role, if you had certain permissions associated with it, you could have certain fields appear. Keep in mind that that is actually baked in, so you wouldn't have to do it that way, because we do have the ability to filter based on security groups. So if I were to type security groups, I could say, for example, this title field, I don't have web security set up, but if it were set up, it would give me the lists of the different roles and let me choose one. I could say only admins, or both users and admins can see this field, or whatever. So that is something that you can do right here, sort of baked into security. But if you want to, you can come up with some more sophisticated rules rather than whether or not they're simply in a group, as to whether or not they can see that. So one thing about, this is a good point. One thing about server-side hiding is that it does stop the list from reaching the browser at all. Why does this make a difference? Well, if you're trying to hide data that is perhaps confidential data, personally identifiable information, things like that, do it on the server side, it's never going to be loaded down into the browser. So just because something can't be seen in the browser doesn't mean that it's not necessarily there. And a clever person can take a look at the DOM by going up into tools in their browser and saying inspect source, and they can see all of that. So if you handle that client side, it'll never be brought down to the client to begin with. So there's no chance for mischief. Couldn't you link the product data with the first list, fewer calls to the server? Yes. Could I do that? I could, but what I didn't want to have happen was have multiple. So in other words, couldn't I just do one SQL Server query that only had the invoice listed once and then had all of the things listed out the correct number of times? Yes, SQL will let you do that. So that may have been another way of handling that as well. You could do a much more clever job than I did with SQL, and you might not need to link the lists at all. That's a really good question. That's a good point. Someone says, yes, might be an issue if you have naughty member of the staff who's looking for things they shouldn't see. Yes, I know. It's terrible staff members. So they say arguments. In arguments, it's logical TF 1, 0, or true or false. Oh my gosh, I don't actually know the answer to that question. Maybe I can figure it out. If I were to go into arguments. And then if I were to say a data type, let's mess this all up, was logical. Value. Runtime, let's say get value, good. I'm surprised I can't set that as a default. So I'm sorry, the answer is I don't actually know whether or not it's TF or 0 or 1 when you're doing arguments. That we'd have to look up in the documentation, which I will. Other questions? Yeah, that's another one. If your invoice header has a total field, you can put it below the list detail, and that's the normal display. Yes, you're absolutely right. That would be a normal way of putting it together. In fact, maybe I'll put this together as a real proper example, nicely formatted and things like that, so that when we post a second version of this after Friday, you can take a look and see how that works. Oh, this is an interesting one. Someone says we sometimes use two list views, one on the left and a split screen for the header records and one on the right for the child records. That works well. Yeah, that would be a nice way of displaying stuff on the screen. You could have in other words, have everything, like if you were looking through a bunch of invoices, you could have one list over here, and then over here, as you were clicking on one, you could see what the details were behind that on this side. Yeah, great example. Cool. Well, that looks like it. Again, another short one today, but I will be coming back with some more stuff for you next week. Thanks for being patient these last few weeks as I got my kids off to college. I didn't realize how long that would take. Anyway, thanks again. Hope to see you at our next Wednesday webinar. Until then, take care, stay well, and send your questions to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. Thanks again. Bye-bye.